The frontier tests a soul. It takes what you have, shows you what you lack, and in the end, reveals the strength you never knew was yours all along. The air in Red Rock Canyon shimmered with heat, the dust tasting of grit and broken promises. Evelyn Montgomery stood before her schoolhouse, a single sheet of paper trembling in her hand. Across from her, Cornelius Crane smiled, a predator disguised in a fine woolen suit. His silver cane reflected the harsh Arizona sun. "Progress requires certain adjustments, Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "My mining rights, as you can see, are indisputable. The silver vein runs directly beneath this plot." The legal document was a masterpiece of deceit, each word a nail in the coffin of her life here. She felt the eyes of his hired men, their hands resting near their sidearms. Later, in the center of town, Sheriff Brody offered a helpless shrug. His tin star seemed to mock him. "My hands are tied, Evelyn. The papers look legitimate. Crane has powerful friends. And the law, well, it bends for men like him." The townsfolk watched from the shade of wooden awnings, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They were good people, but they had their own families to protect. Evelyn felt a profound sense of isolation, as if a glass wall had descended between her and the community she had served for 5 years. Crane's influence was a poison that had already seeped into the heart of the town, leaving her utterly alone in her fight. Her final hour in the schoolhouse was the hardest. The children gathered around her, their small faces etched with confusion. Little Lily, whose letters she had patiently guided into words, pressed a worn book into her hands. It was a collection of essays by Emerson. "So you do not forget us, Miss Evelyn," the child whispered, her voice trembling. Evelyn knelt, hugging the small girl tightly, the scent of chalk dust and innocence filling her senses. She saw the future of this town in their bright, eager eyes, a future now clouded by the shadow of a man who valued silver more than souls. The children's simple gift felt heavier than gold. As twilight painted the canyon in shades of purple and orange, Evelyn locked the schoolhouse door for the final time. The click of the lock echoed in the profound silence, a sound of absolute finality. She held the brass key in her palm, its metal still warm from her hand. Inside her heart, a quiet resolve hardened into steel. She would not be broken. She would walk west, toward the distant promise of Silver Creek. She thought of Emerson's words, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." With one last look at the building that held her memories, she turned and faced the vast, unforgiving expanse of the west. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the walls of her small house. It was a home no longer, merely a shell holding the ghosts of her past life. Evelyn spread a weathered map across the simple pine table. Silver Creek, 100 miles of brutal, untamed territory. Her fingers traced the thin line representing the trail, a journey that seemed impossible. Beside the map lay the sum of her worldly wealth, $3 and a handful of cents. Not enough for a stagecoach ticket. Not even enough for proper supplies. Crane had timed his move perfectly, leaving her destitute and with no choice but to rely on her own 2 feet. She began to pack, a methodical ritual to keep despair at bay. Into her worn carpet bag went 2 simple cotton dresses, a bar of soap, and her mother's Bible, its pages thin with use. Then came the book of essays from her students, a tangible link to the life she was leaving. Lastly, she picked up her father's compass. Its needle quivered, then settled, pointing north with unwavering certainty. "It will always show you the way home, Evie," he had told her. Now, she needed it to show her the way to a new home. Each item was a weight, a memory, a piece of a life she had to carry on her back. A soft knock at the door startled her. It was Anna, the blacksmith's wife, her face a mask of concern. She held a cloth-wrapped parcel that smelled of smoked meat and fresh bread. "You cannot go alone, Evelyn," Anna pleaded, her eyes scanning the packed bag and the map. "It is not safe. Crane's men, they are not good men." Evelyn accepted the food with a grateful heart, but shook her head. That is precisely why I must go alone. I will not bring Crane's wrath down upon you and your family. He has taken enough from this town." Their embrace was a silent acknowledgement of the dangers and the deep bond of their friendship. The first hint of dawn was a pale gray streak against the black sky when Evelyn stepped outside. The air was cool and carried the scent of dust and sage. She took one last look at the silhouette of Red Rock Canyon, the place of her greatest joy and deepest sorrow. She adjusted the heavy satchel on her shoulder, its weight a constant reminder of her loss and her purpose. Taking a deep breath, she clutched her father's compass in her pocket and took her first step. The road west was not just a path on a map. It was a testament to her will to survive, a journey into an unknown future where every sunrise was a victory. Evelyn avoided the main trail, choosing instead a forgotten path that wound through desolate hills. The silence was immense, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the cry of a distant hawk. She knew Crane's men might be watching the main routes, and she could not risk being seen. The sun climbed higher, a merciless furnace in the vast, cloudless sky. The heat pressed down on her, stealing the moisture from her throat and the strength from her limbs. Every mile was a silent battle fought against the unforgiving landscape and the growing ache in her muscles. This land did not suffer weakness gladly. By the second day, her sturdy boots began to betray her. The leather, worn thin from years of use, rubbed her heels raw with every agonizing step. She paused in the meager shade of a stunted juniper tree, carefully removing her boots to inspect the damage. The blisters were a fiery protest against the miles she had forced upon them. She tore a strip of cloth from her spare petticoat and carefully patted the raw spots, a temporary solution to a worsening problem. Doubt, a cold and unwelcome companion, began to whisper in her mind. Could she truly make it? Was her determination enough to conquer this vast emptiness? She reached the banks of a swift-moving mountain river, its churning water a formidable obstacle. There was no bridge, no shallow crossing in sight. Holding her satchel high above her head, she waded into the icy current. The water tugged at her skirts, trying to pull her down. Halfway across, her foot slipped on a slick rock. She fell, the shock of the cold water stealing her breath. For one heart-stopping moment, the satchel slipped from her grasp. With a desperate lunge, she caught it just before the river could claim it. Shaking and soaked, she finally reached the other side, her meager possessions saved by a thread. That night, huddled by a small, smokeless fire, she opened the book of essays. The words of Emerson, read by the flickering firelight, felt like a conversation with a wise friend. The ancestor of every action is a thought. Her thought was survival. Her thought was justice. The words rekindled the flame of her resolve. This journey was more than an escape. It was a crucible, forging her into someone stronger than she had ever been. She was not merely a victim of circumstance. She was the author of her own path, one painful, determined step at a time. The fire crackled, a lone spark of defiance in the immense darkness. The air grew heavy and still, a suffocating silence that preceded violence. Evelyn looked to the west and saw it. A horizon that was no longer a clean line, but a churning, monstrous wall of reddish-brown dust. It rose to meet the sky, a moving mountain that seemed to be swallowing the world. A dust storm. She had seen them before from the safety of her home, but out here, in the open, she knew it was a death sentence for the unprepared. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned the barren landscape desperately, searching for any kind of shelter from the approaching fury. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The land provides, Evie, if you know how to look." Her eyes caught a dark slash in the side of a rocky outcrop. A shallow crevice, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze into. It was her only chance. She scrambled toward it, the wind now a physical force pushing against her, whipping her hair across her face. The first grains of sand stung her cheeks like tiny needles. She reached the crevice just as the leading edge of the storm hit, a roar of wind and dust that blotted out the sun and plunged the world into an eerie orange twilight. Huddled deep within the rock, She peered through a narrow gap. The world outside was a maelstrom of swirling dust. Through the haze, two figures on horseback emerged like phantoms. They were hunched against the wind, their faces wrapped in bandanas. Even in the gloom, she recognized the cruel slump of their shoulders. They were Crane's men. A cold dread, far worse than the storm, seized her. They were not just watching the roads, they were actively searching for her. She was not just a fugitive from poverty. She was prey. She pressed herself deeper into the rock, trying to make her breathing silent, her very existence invisible. The storm raged for what felt like an eternity. When it finally passed, it left behind a world transformed, coated in a fine layer of red dust. Evelyn emerged, weak and shaking. Her water canteen was dangerously low. The sight of Crane's men had changed everything. The knowledge that she was being hunted sharpened her senses and hardened her resolve. This was no longer just a journey for survival. It was a flight for her life. Every shadow could be a threat, every distant rider a potential enemy. She had to be smarter, faster, and more determined than the men who pursued her. Her journey now had a new, terrifying urgency. Miles away, at the Rocky Oak Ranch, Ethan Devlin moved with the quiet efficiency of a man at peace with solitude. The sprawling ranch house, built by his father's hands, was too large for one man, yet he kept every room as his mother had left it. He rose before the sun, the ritual of coffee, and a quiet moment on the porch, a bulwark against the ghosts of his past. The land was his sanctuary, his purpose. It was a legacy paid for in sweat, and, ultimately, in blood. He trusted the certainty of the seasons and the loyalty of his horse more than he trusted the shifting allegiances of men. His father had been murdered 15 years ago, shot in the back during a bitter dispute over water rights. The man responsible, a cunning speculator from the East, had vanished, leaving behind a web of legal deceit and a cloud of suspicion that the law could never penetrate. Ethan had been just a boy, but the memory had forged him into the man he was today. Watchful, guarded, and fiercely protective of his land. He had built the ranch into a success his father would have been proud of, but the success felt hollow, a monument to a grief that never truly faded. His heart was a fortress he allowed no one to enter. His only confidant was Sam, a one-eyed old cowboy who had ridden with his father. Sam's wisdom was as weathered and reliable as the ancient oaks that gave the ranch its name. "You cannot guard a kingdom forever, son," Sam had told him just last week, his good eye fixed on Ethan. "A man needs more than land and memories to keep him warm at night." Ethan had merely grunted in response, but the words had settled in his mind, unwelcome but persistent. He knew Sam was right, but the risk of letting someone in felt greater than the loneliness of keeping them out. He saddled his horse, a powerful buckskin named Dust Devil, and set out on his morning patrol. He preferred to ride the boundaries himself, his eyes scanning the fences, the cattle, the vast expanse of his domain. It was during these solitary rides that he felt closest to his father. The silence of the prairie, a shared language between them. He rode south, toward the creek that marked his property line, the same creek that had been at the center of the dispute that had cost his father his life. He had no way of knowing that this routine patrol would lead him to a discovery that would irrevocably alter the course of his solitary existence. Dust Devil's ears twitched, and the horse let out a low nicker. Ethan reined him in, his gaze sweeping the creek bed ahead. Something was out of place. Near a cluster of cottonwoods lay a crumpled shape, too small to be livestock, too still to be a predator. Caution was a reflex etched into his soul. He dismounted, his movements silent and fluid, and approached on foot. The shape resolved into the figure of a woman, lying face down in the dust. Her travel-worn dress was torn, and a carpet bag lay a few feet away, its contents spilled across the dry earth. He knelt beside her, his first thought that she was dead. Then he saw the faint, shallow rise and fall of her back. He gently turned her over. Her face was pale beneath a layer of grime, her lips cracked and dry. She was younger than he had first thought, with features that held a quiet strength even in unconsciousness. In one hand, she clutched a book as if it were a shield. He uncorked his canteen and let a few drops of precious water fall onto her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, a barely perceptible movement, but it was enough. She was alive. A stranger. A complication he did not need. Despite his ingrained mistrust of outsiders, he could not leave her here to die. With a sigh of resignation, he gathered her spilled belongings, a Bible, a compass, the worn book. He lifted her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, yet her presence felt monumental. He carefully placed her on Dust Devil, then mounted behind her, holding her securely against his chest. As they rode, her head rested against his shoulder, and he was acutely aware of her vulnerability. This was an intrusion, a disruption to the careful order of his life, and yet he felt a strange, unwelcome flicker of protectiveness. Back at the ranch, Elena Garcia, the foreman's wife, rushed out to meet them. Her eyes widened at the sight of the unconscious woman in Ethan's arms. "Madre de Dios, Ethan! What happened?" Elena's hands were already reaching for Evelyn, her maternal instincts taking over. "Bring her inside. To the guest room." As Ethan carried Evelyn into the house, the scent of lavender and cedar from her hair filled his senses. He laid her gently on the bed, a bed that had not been slept in for over a decade. He felt like a trespasser in his own home, the woman's presence, a silent question he was not prepared to answer. Evelyn drifted back to consciousness slowly, the world returning in soft, hazy fragments. She was lying in a real bed, a cool cloth on her forehead. A kind-faced woman with streaks of silver in her dark hair was humming a soft melody. "You are safe now, señorita," the woman, Elena, said. "You are at the Rocky Oak Ranch." Evelyn's memory returned in a painful rush. The dust, the sun, the riders. She tried to sit up, her body protesting with a wave of dizziness. "Easy now. My husband says you walked a long way. You must rest." Later, Ethan stood awkwardly in the doorway of the guest room. He felt out of place, a rough-hewn man in a room of delicate lace and quiet healing. "I am Ethan Devlin," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. "This is my ranch." Evelyn met his gaze. His eyes were the color of a stormy sky, guarded and intense. "I am Evelyn Montgomery. I am in your debt, Mr. Devlin." She began her story, her voice weak at first, then growing stronger as she recounted the injustice she had suffered. She spoke of the town, the school, and the man who had taken it all. When she uttered the name Cornelius Crane, the air in the room grew cold. Ethan's posture stiffened, his hand unconsciously clenching into a fist. A dark, familiar anger rose within him. "Crane," he repeated, the name tasting like poison on his tongue. "He tried the same with my father. Forged documents, false claims on our water rights." He looked at Evelyn, and for the first time, he saw not just a stranger, but a fellow survivor of the same man's treachery. The fortress around his heart cracked, just a little. "He was the reason my father—" Ethan could not finish the sentence. He did not have to. Evelyn saw the raw pain in his eyes, a grief as vast and deep as the prairie itself. In that moment, a powerful connection formed between them, forged in shared loss and a common enemy. His desire to help her was no longer a matter of reluctant charity. It was a quest for justice, a chance to fight a battle his father had lost. "He will not take anything more from this land," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "Not from me, and not from you. You are safe here, Miss Montgomery. We will fight him together." While Ethan's lawyer and Prescott began the slow, arduous process of building a case, Evelyn found she could not remain idle. The sight of the ranch hand's children running wild while their parents worked stirred the teacher within her. She approached Ethan with a proposal. "There is an old storeroom behind the bunkhouse," she said, her eyes shining with purpose. "With a little work, it could be a school." Ethan, surprised by her resilience, agreed without hesitation. The project gave her a sense of purpose, a way to reclaim a piece of the identity Crane had tried to steal. Together, with the help of Elena and a few of the cowboys, they transformed the dusty storeroom. They patched the roof, installed windows, and built simple desks from scrap lumber. Evelyn created a chalkboard with slate paint on a large, smooth board. As she worked, Ethan often found excuses to be nearby, watching her. He saw the way she inspired the others, the quiet determination in every task she undertook. He found himself smiling more than he had in years, a strange warmth spreading through his chest whenever he heard her easy laugh. The first day of school was a triumph. Children who had never held a book before sat with wide-eyed wonder as Evelyn told them stories of history and geography. She taught them sums by counting cattle and letters by writing their own names. Her classroom was a beacon of hope and knowledge in the heart of the ranch. She was not just teaching them to read and write. She was showing them that a world existed beyond the fences of their small lives, a world of possibility they could be a part of. Ethan stood at the back of the classroom, unseen, listening to her teach. Her voice was calm and steady, a gentle force that commanded respect. He saw the profound effect she was having on the children, on his people. He realized she was bringing more than just education to his ranch. She was bringing life back into its very soul and into his. A deep, quiet affection for this remarkable woman took root in his heart. It was a feeling both terrifying and exhilarating, a current of emotion pulling him out of the safe, solitary harbor he had occupied for so long. News of the legal challenge reached Cornelius Crane. Enraged, he decided to escalate the conflict. His men, led by a ruthless enforcer known as Black Bart, rode to the headwaters of the creek that supplied the Rocky Oak Ranch. Under the cloak of darkness, they built a crude but effective dam, diverting the flow of water away from Ethan's land. By morning, the creek was reduced to a muddy trickle. It was a declaration of war, a threat aimed at the very lifeblood of the ranch. Without water, the cattle would die, and the ranch would be ruined. Panic rippled through the ranch hands, but Ethan's resolve was like granite. "He wants us to be afraid," he told his men, his voice ringing with cold fury. "He wants us to break. We will not." He sent riders to the neighboring ranches, not asking for help, but warning them. "Today it is my water. Tomorrow it could be your land." His stand inspired them. Men who had long been his rivals now saw a common enemy. They rode to join him, their faces grim, their resolve matching his. They would not let one man's greed destroy their way of life. The confrontation took place at the dam. Ethan and his allies faced Black Bart and Crane's hired guns across the dry creek bed. The tension was a palpable thing, the air thick with the promise of violence. "This is private property," Black Bart sneered. "You are trespassing." Ethan's voice was dangerously calm. "You are stealing our water. You are threatening our families. Move aside, or we will move you." Just as hands began to move toward their sidearms, a new group of riders appeared on the ridge. At their head was the circuit judge, Judge Fletcher, flanked by 4 stoic U.S. Marshals. "Cornelius Crane!" Judge Fletcher's voice boomed across the valley. "You are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and the illegal obstruction of federal waterways." Crane, who had been observing from a safe distance, turned pale. His hired men looked at each other, their bravado evaporating. The trap, carefully laid by Ethan's lawyer, had sprung. As the marshals took Crane and a sullen Black Bart into custody, the ranchers worked together, tearing down the dam. The water began to flow again, a torrent of life returning to the land. Evelyn watched from a distance, her hand on her heart, as Ethan stood tall, a leader who had not only saved his ranch but united a community. In the weeks that followed, justice moved swiftly. Crane's empire of deceit crumbled under the weight of the evidence against him. The deed to Evelyn's schoolhouse and home in Red Rock Canyon was declared null and void. The property was hers again. She was free to go back, to reclaim her old life. But as she stood on the porch of the ranch house, looking out at the rolling hills and the children playing near her new school, she knew that her old life no longer fit. Her journey had not led her back to where she started, but to where she was meant to be. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, Ethan took her to a high ridge overlooking the ranch. It was the place his father had loved most. "He said you could see the whole world from up here," Ethan said softly. He looked at her, his usual guard down, his stormy eyes filled with a raw, vulnerable emotion. "You have shown me a world I had closed myself off from, Evelyn. A world with light and hope and love." From his pocket, he took a small silver ring set with a single luminous turquoise stone. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She would have wanted it to be worn by a woman of strength and courage. A woman like you. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. I know I am not an easy man. I have walls built high around my heart. But you, Evelyn, you walked right through them without even trying. Stay with me. Build a life with me. Be my partner in this ranch and in all the years to come. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she looked from the ring to his earnest face. This was her home. He was her home. Yes, she whispered, the word carrying all the hope and certainty in her heart. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she knew her long, painful journey was truly over. Together, they stood on the ridge and planned their future. They would build a proper schoolhouse, with glass windows and enough books for every child. They would create a fund, using the ranch's profits, to send the brightest students to academies in the East. They would forge a new legacy, one built not on sorrow and solitude, but on shared dreams and the enduring power of community. The first star of evening appeared in the twilight sky, a beacon shining down on their new beginning.